Football at the absolute highest level has completely ceased to be a mere sporting contest, mutating instead into a breathtaking, unpredictable thriller designed by a sadistic Hollywood screenwriter. In the intense summer heat of July 2026, underneath the massive structural dome and the blinding geometric lights of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia, the reigning champions of the world walked a tightrope suspended over a roaring canyon of total elimination. The round of 16 match between Argentina and a fiercely organized, tactically flawless Egypt side was supposed to be a standard progression for Lionel Scaloni's star-studded squad, but the realities of the tournament expansion have completely shattered the old hierarchies of global football. With only 11 minutes left on the official stadium clock, the massive electronic scoreboard read Egypt 2, Argentina 0. A collective, suffocating panic had gripped the ocean of blue and white jerseys in the stands. The narrative had shifted from an expected celebration into an absolute nightmare, an apocalyptic sporting script that seemed to be actively punishing the world champions for their historical dominance. The Egyptian front line, spearheaded by the clinical and lethal movements of Mostafa Zico, had exploited every single millimeter of space left behind by an exhausted Argentine defensive line, scoring 2 devastating goals that sent shockwaves through Buenos Aires, Miami, and Madrid. To make the cinematic drama even more unbelievably tense, the ultimate moment of salvation had already slipped through the fingers of the greatest player to ever lace up a pair of football boots. Earlier in the second half, with the scoreline heavily favoring the African nations, a penalty was awarded to the Albiceleste. Step up Lionel Messi. The stadium held its breath, thousands of cameras focused on the iconic number 10, expecting the familiar ripple of the back of the net. But life does not always follow the fairy tale layout. Messi struck the ball, and Mostafa Schuber, the Egyptian goalkeeper, produced a monumental, gravity-defying reflex save to tip the ball wide of the post. The empire was crumbling in real time. This massive psychological blow came right on the heels of a historically exhausting round of 32 clash against Cape Verde in Miami, an extraordinary match that many international pundits are already calling the single greatest, most chaotic game of the entire tournament, where Argentina had to bleed for a grueling 120 minutes just to survive the underdog's fury. The ghosts of an early exit were no longer lurking in the shadows. They were standing squarely in the center of the pitch in Atlanta, staring directly into the eyes of a panicked Argentine squad. But before we look at how this chaotic masterpiece unfolded, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like on this video, and tell me in the comments below, is this current 2026 Argentina squad showing the true heart of a back-to-back world champion, or are there massive defensive vulnerabilities exposing a team that is running entirely on fumes? Let me know exactly where you are watching this dramatic archive from, because the journey we are about to break down defies all logical explanation. Let us rewind the clock to understand the terrifying prelude to this Atlanta thriller, traveling back to the tropical humidity of Miami, where the cinematic madness truly kicked off against a fearless Cape Verde side that refused to respect the crown. To fully comprehend the sheer madness of what transpired in Atlanta, we must first examine the deep psychological and physical scars that were inflicted upon this Argentine squad just days prior in the tropical heat of Miami. The round of 32 was supposed to be a straightforward assignment, a tactical stepping stone against a Cape Verde side that had already achieved their historic dream just by qualifying for the knockout rounds of this expanded tournament. Early on, the cinematic script seemed to be functioning precisely according to the traditional hierarchy. Lionel Messi opened the scoring with a flash of vintage brilliance, sending the massive contingent of South American fans at the Hard Rock Stadium into a state of comfortable celebration. But modern football possesses a beautiful, highly chaotic refusal to follow the established royal blueprints. Cape Verde did not look at the 3 stars glittering on the Argentine jerseys with fear. Instead, they looked at them as an invitation to immortality. Operating with an extraordinary level of physical intensity and collective bravery, the African side began systematically dismantling the space around the Argentine midfield, hitting back on rapid, vertical transitions that completely uninstalled Lionel Scaloni's defensive structure. They found a shocking equalizer, turning the comfortable stadium into a pressure cooker of escalating tension. Even when Argentina pushed forward to reclaim the advantage, Cape Verde refused to break, fighting back with a magnificent, historic goal from Sidney Cabral that sailed directly into the top corner of Emiliano Martinez's net, sending the match into a grueling, exhausting period of extra time. The world champions were no longer playing a football match. They were trapped inside a sporting horror movie, watching their physical energy bars deplete to absolute zero underneath the humid Florida sky. The central midfield axis of Alexis Mac Allister and Rodrigo de Paul had to run until their lungs literally burned, wrestling for every single loose ball against an underdog side that was playing with the supernatural energy of an entire continent backing their crusade. The technical superiority of the Albi Celeste was completely neutralized by the raw, unadulterated emotional fury of the match. Lionel Messi was forced to operate in deep areas, his 39-year-old legs enduring heavy, unforgiving tackles as the clock ticked past the 100th minute. The breakthrough finally arrived not through a clean sequence of artistic joga bonito, but through the cruel, devastating tragedy of a defensive error, a desperate clearance that resulted in an own goal by Dani Borges in the 111th minute of the match. Argentina had survived, crawling out of Miami with a narrow, exhausting victory, but the structural cost was immense. They left the pitch completely broken in body and spirit, having emptied their emotional reserve tanks just to avoid the greatest upset in modern World Cup history. They marched toward Atlanta not with the confident stride of conquerors, but with the heavy, dragging steps of survivors, completely unaware that Egypt was already waiting in the wings with an even more sophisticated, lethal trap designed to exploit every single fracture in the world champion's armor. To truly appreciate the sheer scale of the cinematic drama unfolding across North America, we have to look back at the deceptive tranquility of the opening weeks of this tournament. The prologue to this great Argentine thriller was a masterclass in executive footballing authority, a period of absolute elegance that gave the entire world the false impression that defending the crown would be a casual summer cruise. Drawn into a group that promised to test their physical readiness, Lionel Scaloni's men responded by delivering a sequence of tactical exhibitions that felt completely detached from the chaotic madness that would later consume them in the knockout rounds. Argentina marched through the group stage with a perfect 100% record, collecting 9 points from 9, scoring high-quality goals, and keeping their defensive lines completely locked down. The football was fluid, natural, and beautiful to watch, operating like a finely tuned orchestra where every single player knew their exact movement ahead of time. In those early matches, the central midfield triangle of Enzo Fernandez, Rodrigo de Paul, and Alexis Mac Allister controlled the tempo of games with an insulting level of ease, passing around aggressive opposition presses as if they were training in the quiet facilities of Ezeiza. Up front, the dual threat of Julian Alvarez and Lautaro Martinez provided a relentless, terrifying defensive press that prevented opposing teams from ever building a coherent attacking sequence. The media across Buenos Aires and the international press networks were already running out of superlatives, declaring this 2026 version of the Albi Celeste to be even more balanced, mature, and lethal than the legendary squad that conquered Lusail back in 2022. There was a profound sense of tactical invincibility surrounding the camp, an aura of calmness that trickled down from Lionel Scaloni's technical dugout directly into the stands. The fans were singing, the flags were flying, and the players were smiling during their open training sessions, completely convinced that their structural system was entirely immune to the traditional chaos of the World Cup. But football possesses a brilliant, highly dangerous way of setting a trap by feeding your confidence. This initial period of flawless dominance was merely the opening act of a grand cinematic narrative, the bright, sunny beginning that Hollywood directors use right before they unleash an absolute storm of psychological terror upon their main characters. The ease of the group stage blinded the world to the underlying reality that international football has evolved at an unprecedented velocity. The expansion of the tournament meant that smaller nations were arriving with nothing to lose, carrying sophisticated defensive structures and a complete refusal to bow down to historical lineages. While Argentina was collecting comfortable clean sheets, the physical toll of a long club season was quietly accumulating in the muscles of their veteran core. The smooth, mechanical perfection of the group stage created a psychological cushion that would make the sudden, violent impacts of the knockout rounds feel like a head-on collision. They believed they had written a script of pure control, entirely unaware that the true movie was about to turn into a wild, high-stakes battle for survival where their historical prestige would mean absolutely nothing under the blinding stadium lights. At the absolute center of this unfolding football cinematic masterpiece sits a figure whose entire career defies the natural laws of human biology and athletic longevity. Lionel Messi stepped onto the pitches of North America in the summer of 2026 not merely as a player, but as a living, breathing monument to sports history, carrying the immense weight of a nation's hopes at the staggering age of 39. While the vast majority of his contemporaries from the golden eras of the past 2 decades have either retired to television studios or moved to distant, non-competitive leagues, the iconic Argentine captain remains firmly embedded at the absolute pinnacle of global football. His physical presence on the pitch during this tournament has mutated into a high-stakes box office event, a cinematic attraction where every single touch of the ball could potentially shatter a record that has stood for half a century. Despite the natural loss of the explosive raw velocity that defined his youth in Barcelona, Messi has compensated by elevating his spatial awareness and technical execution to a level of pure, unmatched genius. He operates like a veteran chess grandmaster, moving through the midfield spaces with a calculated, deliberate slowness, only to unleash a lightning-fast, telepathic pass or a clinical finish the exact microsecond the opposition defense blinks. The statistical milestones he has established during this 2026 campaign are nothing short of spectacular. By finding the back of a net in the intense knockout match against Cape Verde in Miami, Messi officially became the oldest South American player to ever score a goal in the direct elimination phases of a World Cup, officially eclipsing a historic record that belonged to the legendary Uruguayan icon Obdulio Varela since the tournament of 1954. But his hunger for historical dominance did not stop there. That precise strike also extended an unbelievable, mind-boggling streak, marking his 8th consecutive World Cup match with at least one official goal, an active sequence of individual consistency that has completely rewritten the archival books of FIFA. The global audience is fully aware that they are witnessing the absolute final act of a legendary sporting drama, a closing sequence that is being captured in high definition across the stadiums of the United States. Every arena he enters becomes a roaring sea of blue and white number 10 jerseys, with fans traveling from every corner of the planet just to catch one final glimpse of the magician before the curtain falls for good. This immense, unprecedented reverence creates a unique, highly charged atmosphere around the Argentine squad. Lionel Scaloni has built a tactical system designed to protect his aging captain, surrounding him with hyper-athletic midfielders who are more than willing to run the extra miles to ensure Messi preserves his energy for the moments of absolute maximum impact. But this heavy reliance on a 39-year-old king also means that when the system experiences a sudden, violent shock, the pressure on his shoulders multiplies to an almost unbearable degree. The records and the box office hype mean absolutely nothing when a clinical, highly disciplined opponent decides to tear up the romantic script and force the legendary king to fight for his life in the arenas of the knockout rounds. The stage for the round of 16 was set inside the spectacular, hypermodern cavern of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, but the atmosphere inside the Argentine camp was far from comfortable. The physical reality of football is completely indifferent to the romanticism of cinematic scripts, and the brutal truth was that Lionel Scaloni's men were entering this high-stakes arena with their physical reserve tanks dangerously close to empty. The grueling 120 minutes of pure warfare against Cape Verde in the previous round had left a visible, heavy toll on the muscles and minds of the world champions. As the players walked out onto the pitch, their movements lacked the sharp, explosive velocity that had defined their flawless progression through the group stage. Facing them was an Egyptian national team that had spent days meticulously studying this exact vulnerability, preparing a clinical, deeply sophisticated tactical trap designed to shock the world. The Pharaohs, operating under a disciplined defensive blueprint, had no intention of trading direct attacking blows with the tournament favorites, choosing instead to assemble a low, compact, and completely suffocating defensive lock across the edge of their penalty box. Their manager had organized a system where the spaces between the defensive and midfield lines were entirely non-existent, forcing Argentina into slow, predictable horizontal passing sequences that led directly into blind alleys. Every time Enzo Fernandez or Alexis Mac Allister attempted to slide a vertical pass through the center of the pitch, a red shirt was already there to intercept the ball, initiating a rapid, terrifyingly direct counterattack. The true danger of the Egyptian plan lay in the blazing, unadulterated speed of their frontline transitions, led by the intelligent and ruthless positioning of Mostafa Zico. The Argentine defensive line, marshaled by Christian Romero and Nicolas Otamendi, found themselves constantly dragged out of position, forced to turn and sprint toward their own goal against attackers who were playing with a massive physical advantage. The warning signs were flashing red from the opening minutes of the match, but the world champions could not find the collective tactical answer to break the lock. The The match began to take on a highly stressful, claustrophobic rhythm, with the Atlanta Stadium turning into a pressure cooker of escalating Argentine anxiety. Scaloni gesticulated furiously from his technical area, urging his players to move the ball with greater speed and to utilize the wide areas of the pitch, but the fatigue in their legs was completely overriding the instructions from a dugout. The technical elegance of the Alba Celeste was being systematically neutralized by the raw, mechanical efficiency of the Egyptian press. As the first half progressed, the impossible began to look like an absolute certainty under the bright stadium lights. The tactical blueprint of the Pharaohs was working to absolute perfection, transforming the expected Argentine progression into a high-stakes battle for survival, where historical lineages and golden stars meant absolutely nothing to an opponent that was smelling blood in the water. The absolute zenith of this cinematic horror show materialized in the opening stretches of the second half, presenting a sequence of events so intensely dramatic it threatened to break the emotional sanity of the fans packed inside the Atlanta Stadium. With Egypt holding on to their shocking, early 1-0 advantage courtesy of an imperial 15th-minute header from Yasser Ibrahim, Argentina had thrown their entire tactical blueprint out the window, attacking with a desperate, chaotic lack of structure. Then, a sudden spark of hope cut through the blinding stadium lights. Nicolas Tagliafico, utilizing all his veteran craftiness, drove directly into the Egyptian penalty area, forcing a reckless, mistimed defensive challenge that sent him crashing heavily to the turf. The referee's whistle blew instantly, pointing directly to the penalty spot. A thunderous, earth-shaking roar erupted from the blue and white stands, a collective release of tension because everyone in the arena knew exactly what this moment was supposed to signify. It was the designated moment of the ultimate fairy tale equalizer, the exact setup where Lionel Messi steps into the frame to restore balance to the footballing universe. The 39-year-old captain collected the ball, his face a mask of absolute focus, carrying the historical weight of his 8-match World Cup scoring streak directly on his shoulders. He placed the ball down, took his measured steps backward, and ran up to strike it toward the bottom corner. But cinema does not accept cheap, predictable formulas. Mostafa Shobir, the 26-year-old Egyptian goalkeeper who was playing the match of his absolute life, anticipated the trajectory perfectly, launching his entire physical frame southwest to pull off a monumental, gravity-defying fingertip save that sent the ball flying wide of the post. The stadium went into a state of cataclysmic shock. The living god of Argentine football had been denied from the spot, a psychological blow so profoundly devastating that it completely paralyzed the structural cohesion of Lionel Scaloni's side. Before the world champions could even process the reality of the missed penalty, the ruthless script of modern football punished them with an immediate, lethal counterstroke. In the 67th minute, Egypt capitalized on the collective Argentine paralysis. An imperial coast-to-coast dash down the right wing by Haitham Hassan uninstalled the remaining Argentine defensive lines, allowing him to slide a pinpoint pass to Mohamed Salah, who immediately enabled Mostafa Zico to rifle an unstoppable, low drive directly past a diving Emiliano Martinez. 2-0. The reigning world champions were officially sliding into the dark abyss of an early elimination, completely outplayed by an African tactical masterclass that had turned the Mercedes-Benz Stadium into their own private theater of dreams. Before we look at how this absolute tragedy transformed into the most legendary comeback in World Cup history, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, drop a heavy like on this video, and tell me in the comments below, when Messi missed that penalty, did you think Argentina was completely finished? Or did you still believe in miracle? Let me know where you are watching this wild archive from, because the final act of this cinematic masterpiece defies everything we know about the sport. The electronic scoreboard hanging over the center circle of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium was a cold, flashing testament to what appeared to be the official end of an empire. Egypt 2, Argentina 0. The clock was ticking mercilessly past the 75th minute, and with every rotation of the second hand, the crown was sliding farther away from the heads of the world champions. Lionel Scaloni stood on the edge of his technical area, his face completely pale, his hands moving rapidly as he made a sequence of high-stakes tactical changes, throwing every single available attacking asset into the final third of the pitch. The tactical sophistication that had defined Argentina's historical dominance was completely replaced by a raw, desperate, and entirely chaotic emotional fury. They were no longer playing within a structured blueprint. They were trying to violently force open a locked steel door through sheer willpower alone. The Egyptian defensive unit, growing increasingly confident with every passing minute, had transformed their low block into an absolute fortress, throwing their bodies in front of every single shot, block, and cross that came into their territory. The match had entered that specific cinematic phase where the main characters look completely defeated, their physical energy entirely spent, moving through the motions of a tragedy that has already been written. But the true heart of this Argentine generation lies in their absolute refusal to accept a tragic ending. The awakening began not through an intricate sequence of artistic passing, but through a moment of pure, unadulterated defensive aggression. In the 79th minute, after winning a hard-fought corner kick on the right wing, Rodrigo de Paul swung a high, curling cross directly into the heart of the Egyptian penalty area. The ball hung in the air for what felt like an absolute eternity, suspended underneath the geometric roof of the stadium. Out of a crowded mass of jerseys, Christian Cuti Romero materialized like a thunderbolt, rising higher than any defender, defying gravity for a split second to power a ferocious, unstoppable header into the absolute roof of the net. 2-1. The stadium erupted into a deafening, localized earthquake as Romero didn't even stop to celebrate, sprinting directly into the back of the net to rip the ball away from the goalkeeper's hands, screaming at his teammates to march back to the center spot. The goal was a massive psychological injection of pure adrenaline, a sudden, violent shift in the atmospheric pressure of the arena. The narrative was no longer about an embarrassing elimination. It had mutated into a race against time, a direct invitation to a grand cinematic finale. The Egyptian players, who had played an absolutely flawless match for nearly 80 minutes, suddenly felt the heavy, suffocating weight of history pressing down on their shoulders. The world champions were no longer walking, they were sprinting, their legs completely liberated from the fatigue of the previous rounds as they realized that the fairy tale was still very much alive in the state of Georgia. The final 10 minutes of regulation time inside the Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta transformed the football pitch into a scene of pure, unadulterated sporting anarchy, an absolute masterpiece of emotional volatility that threatened to completely shatter the psychological sanity of everyone watching across the globe. The massive architectural arena had entirely lost its structural composure, mutating into a deafening, echoing cauldron of sound where over 90,000 voices were screaming in a frantic race against the cold, merciless progression of the electronic clock hanging over the center circle. The Egyptian national team, completely terrified by the sudden, violent, and thunderous awakening of the world champions after Christian Romero's thumping header, abandoned all previous attempts to maintain any form of an attacking outlet or vertical transition. They chose instead to retreat every single red jersey deep into their own penalty area, establishing a desperate, dense, and suffocating human wall of absolute resistance in front of their goalkeeper, Mostafa Shobir. It was a tactical siege of epic, historical proportions, the kind of dramatic sporting scenario that filmmakers spend millions of dollars trying to replicate on the silver screen, but can never quite capture the raw authenticity of the moment. Argentina was moving the football from flank to flank with a dizzying, hyper-aggressive velocity, with Rodrigo de Paul, Enzo Fernandez, and Lionel Messi forming a high-pressure offensive perimeter just outside the Egyptian box, desperately searching for a single micromillimeter of space to exploit. The immense physical fatigue that had heavily plagued the Albiceleste throughout the match due to their grueling 120 minutes of warfare against Cape Verde was now entirely burned away, replaced by a massive, supernatural psychological injection of pure, raw adrenaline. Every single bounce of the ball, every single slide tackle, and every single whistle from the referee felt like a ticking explosive device ready to detonate and end an international empire. Then, in the exact 85th minute of this historical thriller, the intense, unrelenting tactical pressure finally broke the Egyptian dam in the most spectacular and dramatic fashion imaginable. Alexis Mac Allister collected a loose ball on the left wing, drove aggressively toward the touchline with his last remaining ounce of physical energy, and delivered a low, hard, driving cross directly across the face of the 6-yard box. The Egyptian central defenders managed to slide in with absolute desperation, getting a foot to the ball to deflect the initial danger, but their clearance lacked the necessary distance and power to clear the zone, flying directly toward the dangerous edge of the 18-yard line. Out of the absolute chaos and a sea of tangled legs, Julian Alvarez materialized with the predatory, lethal instincts of a true cinematic hero, arriving at the dropping ball a fraction of a second before his defensive marker to strike a ferocious, definitive first-time half volley with his right foot. The strike was absolutely magnificent and completely lethal, a low, curving bullet that tore through a dense forest of bodies and skipped violently across the damp turf, leaving the heroic Mustafa Shobir completely rooted to the spot, entirely paralyzed as the ball slammed into the bottom right corner of the net. 2-2. The stadium erupted into an absolute madhouse, a literal explosion of blue and white emotion that shook the concrete foundations of the arena and sent shockwaves through Buenos Aires. Alvarez sprinted toward the corner flag with his arms extended wide, his face a mask of pure ecstasy, before being immediately engulfed by a tidal wave of his teammates who jumped over the advertising boards to join the celebration. On the opposite side of the pitch, the Egyptian players collapsed to their knees, their faces buried deep in the grass, completely devastated by the reality that their historic two-goal masterpiece had been completely dismantled in a frantic 6-minute window of pure Argentine fury. The narrative had reached its absolute boiling point, proving that the world champions had crawled back from the dead, refusing to let the crown slide into the abyss, and setting the stage for a grand finale that defied all logical laws of modern international football. With the electronic clock ticking past the 91st minute, the Mercedes-Benz Stadium had officially entered the realm of absolute sporting mythology, a space where logical tactical analysis dies and pure cinematic fate takes complete control of the script. The scoreline was locked at 2-2, a devastatingly intense situation that seemed to point directly toward another grueling, exhausting 30-minute period of extra time that neither side possessed the physical capacity to endure. The players on the pitch were moving like ghosts, their muscles completely locked with lactic acid, their jerseys soaked in sweat, pushing themselves forward through sheer, unadulterated willpower alone under the blinding stadium lights. The Egyptian national team, though mentally shattered by the loss of their two-goal lead, had managed to stabilize their defensive lines, forming a desperate perimeter to protect the draw and gamble their destiny on a penalty shootout. But true cinema demands an absolute climax, a definitive moment of high-stakes poetry that refuses to accept the compromise of an extended overtime period. The clock showed the 92nd minute when Rodrigo de Paul intercepted a tired clearance near the halfway line, immediately shifting the ball wide to Lautaro Martinez on the right wing. The Inter Milan striker, who had endured a deeply frustrating night up to this point, looked up, calculated the trajectory, and delivered a mesmerizing, telepathic cross deep into the heart of the Egyptian penalty box. Out of nowhere, sprinting from the depths of the midfield with the absolute last ounce of energy in his lungs, Enzo Fernandez materialized between two central defenders like a ghost in the night. He launched his entire physical frame forward, connecting with the ball with an absolutely flawless, clinical header that sent it flying completely past the outstretched, desperate arms of Mustafa Shobir, slamming violently into the absolute back of the net. 3-2. The stadium did not merely cheer, it literally exploded into a state of total, unadulterated cosmic madness, a roaring tidal wave of blue and white euphoria that shook the entire city of Atlanta. Enzo Fernandez stripped his jersey off, sprinting toward the screaming fans with his veins popping from his neck, entirely consumed by the historic magnitude of what he had just accomplished. This was not just a simple match-winning goal to seal the most spectacular comeback of the 2026 World Cup, it was a strike of profound archival significance, officially registered as the 3,000th goal scored in the entire history of the FIFA World Cup since its inception in 1930. The timing was almost terrifyingly perfect, a milestone of global importance delivered at the absolute peak of a knockout thriller. The Egyptian players collapsed to the turf in unison, completely broken, their spirits utterly crushed by a modern footballing empire that simply refused to die. Argentina had traveled deep into the jaws of absolute disaster, faced their own sporting mortality on the grandest stage of them all, and somehow found a way to rewrite their destiny, turning a potential national tragedy into a timeless masterpiece of pure, unadulterated football cinema. The final whistle from the referee did not just signal the end of a football match, it sounded like the definitive closing credits of a high-stakes psychological drama that had pushed an entire nation to the absolute brink of despair. As the sound echoed through the massive structural dome of the Atlanta Stadium, confirming the unbelievable 3-2 victory, the entire Argentine bench sprinted onto the pitch in a state of unadulterated madness. But amid the roaring chaos, the sprinting players, and the flying water bottles, the lens of global television immediately focused on a single, isolated scene in the center circle. Lionel Messi, the 39-year-old king of global football, slowly collapsed directly onto his knees, burying his face deep inside his hands as his entire physical frame began to shake with uncontrollable emotion. These were not the heavy, devastating tears of retirement or defeat that the world had seen on Neymar's face just days prior. These were the raw, overwhelming tears of profound, supernatural psychological relief. The greatest player to ever lace up a pair of boots was weeping from the absolute depths of his soul because he knew, with absolute certainty, how close he had come to being the central villain in a national sporting tragedy. If Argentina had been eliminated on this warm July night, the defining image of his historic 2026 campaign would not have been the records he shattered in Miami against Cape Verde, but rather that agonizing moment in the second half when his penalty strike was spectacularly pushed aside by Mostafa Shobir. The haunting ghost of that missed opportunity had weighed on his shoulders for every single second of the remaining match, a suffocating pressure that few humans on this planet could ever comprehend. But the beautiful, highly cinematic reality of this current Argentine squad is that they are no longer just a collection of players waiting for their captain to save them. They have mutated into a fiercely loyal brotherhood willing to bleed to protect his legendary legacy. Within seconds of his collapse, Rodrigo de Paul, Enzo Fernandez, and Christian Romero arrived like a protective wall, throwing themselves onto the turf to embrace their emotional captain, lifting him up into the Georgia air as the stadium chanted his name in a deafening, rhythmic wave of reverence. Messi smiled through the tears, hugging Enzo Fernandez tightly, whispering words of gratitude into the ear of the young midfielder who had just scored the historic 3,000th goal in World Cup history to salvage the dreams of 47 million people back home. This was the ultimate scene of redemption, a powerful cinematic moment that perfectly illustrated the unique, unbreakable bond that defines this modern era of the Albiceleste. They had stared directly into the abyss of total failure, felt the cold wind of an embarrassing early exit, and somehow crawled back into the light together as a collective unit. The king had been saved by his court, his historic scoring streak remained intact, and his final World Cup dream lived to fight another day, leaving the entire world completely breathless at the sheer, unadulterated emotional scale of the movie they had just witnessed. The blinding, rhythmic flashing of hundreds of media cameras inside the hypermodern press room of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium created a stark, clinical contrast to the raw emotional chaos that had just unfolded on the pitch outside. Lionel Scaloni stepped up to the microphone, his face looking visibly aged, his skin pale and lined with the intense psychological exhaustion of a manager who had just watched his tactical system flirt with total sporting destruction for 2 consecutive matches. There were no triumphant smiles, no arrogant declarations of superiority from the man who had guided Argentina to the absolute pinnacle of global football back in 2022. Instead, the room was filled with a heavy, serious atmosphere as Scaloni delivered a deeply honest and clinical diagnosis of his team's current physical reality in this expanded 2026 tournament. He openly admitted to the gathered international journalists that the Albiceleste was currently operating on the absolute limit of their physical capabilities, running entirely on pure psychological adrenaline rather than mechanical freshness. The brutal reality of modern international football is completely indifferent to historical prestige, and the immense structural toll of surviving 2 back-to-back knockout thrillers had clearly pushed his veteran core to the brink of collapse. The grueling 120 minutes of pure warfare against Cape Verde in Miami, followed immediately by the desperate, high-velocity chase to overturn a 2-goal deficit against Egypt's lethal counterattacks, had left his squad completely drained. Key tactical assets like Alexis Mac Allister, Rodrigo de Paul, and the legendary 39-year-old Lionel Messi were forcing their bodies to endure extreme workloads, wrestling for every single possession, while nursing the deep muscle fatigue that accumulates over a long, punishing global club season. Pundits and sports analysts across Buenos Aires and Madrid were already raising serious alarms about the defensive fractures that these matches had exposed in the world champion's armor, pointing out that an opponent with greater clinical precision in the upcoming quarterfinals might not allow Argentina the luxury of another dramatic, late-game Hollywood comeback. Scaloni gesticulated heavily with his hands, explaining that while the tactical adjustments and the late substitutions had successfully altered the trajectory of the match, his team simply could not afford to keep walking this dangerous high-wire act if they intended to successfully defend their global crown. The tactical blueprint needed an immediate, sophisticated recalibration to restore defensive stability and preserve the precious energy of his aging core. As the media session concluded, the players could be seen slowly walking toward the team bus, their steps heavy, their bodies wrapped in ice packs, presenting the image of a squad that had just survived a violent head-on collision rather than a standard football match. They had successfully navigated the traps set by Africa's finest footballing technicians, but the cinematic script was only growing more demanding, and the physical tax required to write another happy ending was threatening to bankrupt the world champions before they could even catch a glimpse of the final match. When the blinding stadium lights of Atlanta are finally switched off and the deafening echo of 90,000 screaming fans fades into the summer night, we are left with a profound, undeniable realization about this historic 2026 campaign. The reigning champions of Argentina are no longer the smooth, flawless, and completely predictable footballing machine that dominated the pitches of Qatar back in 2022. Instead, they have evolved into something entirely different, a team that has fully embraced the chaotic aesthetics of an unpredictable Hollywood blockbuster movie. They are a squad that willingly bleeds, a collective unit that experiences deep structural fractures, slips into terrifying defensive lapses, and flirts directly with total sporting mortality on a weekly basis, only to find a supernatural, poetic strength at the absolute bottom of their souls to write a perfect ending. This is the true cinematic beauty of modern international football at its absolute peak, a testament to the reality that true greatness is not defined by avoiding crisis, but by how a legendary group of players reacts when they are staring directly into the dark jaws of elimination. From the tropical, exhausting humidity of Miami, where they had to fight for a grueling 120 minutes against a fearless Cape Verde side, to the heart-stopping, apocalyptic comeback against a brilliant Egyptian team under the dome of the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Argentina has proven to the entire world that their identity is completely unbreakable. They have transformed the pitch into a high-stakes theater of pure emotion, where their aging 39-year-old King Lionel Messi can miss a crucial penalty and still walk off the field wrapped in the protective, triumphant embrace of a younger generation that refuses to let his final dream die. As they pack their bags and prepare to march forward into the high-stakes battleground of the quarterfinals, the global footballing community is left completely breathless, wondering exactly how much physical and emotional currency this squad has left to spend in their pursuit of back-to-back world titles. One thing, however, remains absolutely certain. Whether they successfully defend their golden crown or fall dramatically along the way, this Argentine journey has already cemented itself as an archive of pure, unadulterated sports art, a story that will be told for generations as the tournament where football officially became pure cinema. Now, as the screen fades to black and the final credits begin to roll on this incredible chapter, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep breakdown of football history, and drop a final comment below. Can this chaotic, battle-scarred Argentine squad survive the tactical storms ahead and lift the trophy once again? Or will the immense physical toll finally break them in the next round? Let me know your definitive tactical predictions down below. Drop a like to support the channel, and I will see you all in the very next cinematic archive.